Hey there, Sooner football fans. Welcome back to the OU Insider YouTube channel. This is the Quick Slant series. Parker Thune alongside Jesse Crittenden bringing you another Tuesday breakdown of Brent Venables' press conference and an early look ahead to the matchup that could push the Sooners to 8-0, Jesse. The Sooners obviously stretched their record to 7-0 by hanging on by the skin of their teeth against UCF at the Palace on the Prairie this past Saturday. Now they go on the road for what will be a tough two-game swing. The first challenge, getting past the Kansas Jayhawks in Lawrence. The next challenge will be knocking off a resurgent Oklahoma State team up in Stillwater. Now, the one thing that stands out about Brent Venables' press conference, I would say more than everything else, he's obviously a Kansas native. Grew up in Salina, played at Kansas State. He is altogether familiar with football in the Sunflower State and has a lot of respect to Jesse for the turnaround that Lance Leipold has orchestrated, on a very accelerated timeline at the University of Kansas.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, even just think about the last time OU made the trip to Lawrence, in 2021, which ended up being an incredibly interesting game. I think more so than anybody could have possibly predicted. OU was down 10-0 in that game, but Kansas was still just in the midst of just year after year of disappointing football. And I mean, Parker, you were there. There was nobody in that stadium when that game started in 2021.
No, they let folks in for free at halftime.
Yeah, they were just desperate for anybody to come in. That's not going to be the scene on Saturday, Parker. It's going to be a full stadium. It's going to be packed. This Kansas team is 5-2, and it was pretty cool to hear Brent say it's not only cool just to see Kansas kind of back on the map, and that's good for the Big 12, but also for him to express some home state pride for that program.
Now, I think the narrative heading into this game for many OU fans and those paying attention nationally as well is the major storyline is who starts at quarterback for Kansas, whether that is Jalen Daniels or whether that is Jason Bean. And I think while most of the country is probably less bullish on Kansas to pull this upset if it's Jason Bean versus the alternative in Jalen Daniels, OU fans know as well as anybody that Jason Bean, can bring a little juice from the pocket at times. He has burned Oklahoma in two consecutive matchups, going back to 2021, the last time they went up to Lawrence. He had 4 touchdown passes in Norman last year as the Sooners won a 52-42 shootout. Here was Brent Venables earlier today on Jason Bean, the Jayhawks backup quarterback.
Both have been really, really good when they've played, and certainly Bean is just under 70% of his passes. I think 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions is it. So doing a great job delivering, and he's giving the ball to everybody, and then he was able to buy time, keep his eyes down the field, create explosive plays. He had one against Oklahoma State. He's running to his left, and Oklahoma State had him covered, and then the receiver just does a great job of working open. And he lofts it across his body and hits the guy in stride up the sideline in a really tight window. Just outstanding plays, and he's the quote unquote backup, and so they've done a really good job. Really good quarterbacks.
So as I mentioned, Jesse, if you're a Sooner football fan, given what Jason Bean has done against Oklahoma in each of the last 2 matchups between these 2 programs, you probably have a little bit more respect for him than the average casual observer.
Yeah, and Parker, this as well as anybody. I've said a lot about that game last year, in Norman between these 2 teams that OU won 52-42. That game was close for a long time, and OU had to do some things to pull that game out. But Jason Bean was pretty good that day, and I think if Jalen Daniels was playing, I think this would be full on. Hey, it's okay to be a little nervous. Like OU should be favored, but I think that he would make it that more, he would make an already good Kansas offense even more potent. But don't overlook Jason Bean. I mean, this Kansas offense is still scoring really well, Parker. They're 21st in the country in scoring offense. You know, Jason Beans had some good performances. He has a really good quarterback efficiency rating. He's got 9 passing touchdowns on the season. I believe only 2 interceptions. He's completing 65% of his passes. And this Kansas team is good. This is a genuinely good Kansas team, playing in Lawrence in an environment that I'm sure they would love nothing more than to beat OU on their way out the door. And if last weekend's game against UCF told us anything, Parker, is you can't overlook anybody. And this is a good Kansas team, regardless who's at quarterback.
And I think what we also learned last week in the Sooners matchup with UCF is that Oklahoma, as much so as any defense, can be befuddled at times by misdirection and deception. And that is something that might not be as prolific within Kansas's offensive scheme as it is for UCF, but it is something of which the Jayhawks make regular use. And Ethan Downs noted that in post-practice availabilities last night.
Just eye discipline. That's the biggest thing. Eye discipline across all areas. At KU, they do a lot of eye tricks. They want to mess with those eyes, just like UCF did. And being a more locked-in, disciplined team, the most disciplined team usually always wins. So just being that team from now on, focusing on that, even on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, ramping up until you get to Saturday, a week's preparation.
So yeah, Jesse, obviously you got to account for an extra variable anytime you have a mobile quarterback, but especially coming into this game as a double-digit underdog at home, you have to imagine this Kansas team is going to reach into the bag of tricks at least a little bit.
Yeah, and I think the takeaway from that game on Saturday, and many players touched on it, Brent Venables talked about it today, is that the OU needs to be, the defense needs to be a little bit more disciplined. And he talked a lot about where the eyes are, where everybody's eyes are in that defense, and they got the better of them on Saturday. UCF hit them a few different times. Think of the 86-yard touchdown to Javon Baker that should have been called back, probably. But regardless, OU's defense got beat. It was a really good play design, and Javon Baker got behind the OU defense. So we've seen in the past that mobile quarterbacks can give this OU defense problems. And I think if you have a good coaching staff that knows how to utilize that trickery, that could give OU's defense some problems. And I respect this Kansas coaching staff a lot. And I think they're going to try to use Jason Bean's full versatility to try to confuse Oklahoma.
One thing the Sooner defense failed to do this past Saturday against UCF for the first time all year was force a turnover. And by virtue of the interception on the tipped pass to Drake Stoops, the Sooners actually lost the turnover battle to UCF. Now, I asked Gentry Williams after practice last night if the lack of turnovers Saturday was a product of opportunities not presenting themselves or the Oklahoma defense not being opportunistic enough. And here's what he had to say.
There's always going to be opportunities in the game to make plays that you're going to wish you had back. And I think we looked back at the film this weekend and we understood that there was a lot of plays that we left on the field. And we're going to get better from that. Hopefully it'll apply to Kansas this week.
Now, Jesse, obviously kind of a blip on the radar, all things considered, because not only had the Sooners had at least one turnover in each of the first 6 games of the season, they'd actually had at least 2 turnovers in each of the first 6 games of the season. So they'd been pretty consistent in that department. To their credit, UCF played a heck of a game offensively, just as far as overall cleanliness. It was a well-called game by Gus Malzahn and offensive coordinator Darren Hinshaw. But heading into Lawrence, naturally, anytime you're going on the road against a team that is capable of hanging with you, as we know this Kansas team will be, you can't afford to lose the turnover battle.
No, and I think that's the other thing with this Kansas team, Parker, is they haven't turned the ball over very much. And so I think, and really the thing about OU's defense, the thing that's propelled them all year is their ability to get takeaways. And when they don't get takeaways, we see what happened last weekend. Because I think this OU defense all season has been kind of bend but don't break and make the plays when when you can make them. And so I think that's going to be the recipe for the rest of the season, Parker, is OU's defense needing to be opportunistic, create turnovers, get OU's offense and good field position. If they don't, I think the overall takeaway from UCF obviously was OU did enough to win the game, but you can't play that well moving forward against some of these teams. I think that's going to be one area in particular that I don't think OU can afford to lose the turnover battle and expect to have much success in Lawrence.
And one area in which Oklahoma left a lot of meat on the bone last Saturday was in the kicking department. Here was Brent Venables earlier today when asked about his embattled place kicker, Zach Schmidt.
You know, Zach has been really good. He missed a couple the last few weeks, and that's not good. And this is, again, everybody is held to the same standard. We don't have great depth there. And a week ago, we had some guys banged up, as well. But I believe and have confidence in him. But we got to be better. That goes without saying.
So that right there, Jesse, tells you really all you need to know about the kicker situation. He didn't explicitly say it, but what Brent Venables was communicating there is that, well, there's no viable alternative right now, at least not one that the coaches trust.
Yeah, that's kind of, I think it's admirable, and I think you like when, Brent Venables to stick up for a player who's struggling. But the reality, again, it's what we just talked about. The OU can't make the same mistakes they made on Saturday and expect to win out the rest of the way. That, I think, at the top of that list is the missed field goals. And those missed field goals really hurt, because they all came in the first quarter when OU had really good field position on all those drives, and that kept OU from establishing, dominance early. And Parker, I like what you said in your post-game column on Sunday about which everybody should go read on OUinsider.com. But I like the way, you touched on not only some of the comparisons, I think, to the 2004 season, right? With what was that kicker's name?
Trey DiCarlo. That's a blast
right
from the past.
That's right. He struggled, and Bob Stoops eventually pulled him and replaced him. And I think what you said was, it's not about replacing Zach Schmidt and booting him off the team, but you'd like to think there's some competition for that spot. So either way, it doesn't sound like that's where Brent Venables is headed, but I do think he said enough to indicate that Zach Schmidt does need to get, like, you can't have that kind of performance again. I do think we would see a likelihood of some changes if we have another performance this weekend like we did last weekend.
Dylan Gabriel has been steadily excellent all season for Oklahoma, and very quietly, he had another excellent performance this past Saturday, 253 yards through the air, 3 touchdown passes, did throw 1 interception, which was very obviously not his fault. An uncharacteristic miscue by Drake Stoops led to the turnover there. But he has been stable. He has been consistent for this football team. What has made his life more difficult, and I would say what makes his season to this point, his overall performance, even more impressive, is the fact that the running game has been very conspicuously absent for Oklahoma, Jesse. And Brent Venables touched on his backfield situation in his press conference earlier today. Take a listen real quick.
Gavin did some great things as the game went along, and we know what he's capable of. And this is a game of doing, and we need those guys, that room, I believe, when we're playing like we're capable of playing, and in all phases and all the different areas around them, that should be a position of strength for us.
Okay, so it should be a position of strength for this program, Jesse, but right now it just isn't. Marcus Major leads this team with 308 rushing yards through 7 games.
I think the best way I can describe it, Parker, is just it's confusing. And I think UCF, I think that game was maybe the most confusing it's ever been. I mean, OU had 57 rushing yards on 19 attempts in the first half. And then all of a sudden in the fourth quarter, they start breaking off chunk runs. And, and that's obviously capped off by Gavin Sawchuk's 30-yard touchdown run. So I think that's been the frustrating thing, is there's been moments like that, but there's also been moments like that first half where they just can't get, they're averaging 3 yards a carry. And you look across the country, and I mentioned this too on the radio, but Oklahoma State and Ollie Gordon, who had 286 rushing yards on Saturday and is absolutely torching everybody he's playing against. So, and again, I think it's also confusing because the rotation, Tawi Walker was out on Saturday. Did Gavin Sawchuk do enough on Saturday to earn the reps? Does Tawi Walker come in on Saturday? Does he come back and get the starting role? How about Marcus Major, who continues to see a lot of volume? So I think it's mostly been confusing. And I told you this, OU's running game, it's not that it's been all awful, but it has to be better if OU wants to get through the end of the regular season and get where they want to go.
Realistically, let me ask you this. How much will getting Tawi Walker this Saturday help because sat out the UCF game due to what Brent Venables termed an in-house suspension, which is to say he had words with a member of the coaching staff on the practice field, and they decided, okay, you're not going to play this Saturday. So not anything that's going to linger in the long term. No legit off-field issues there. But you get him back for Kansas. Brent Venables has said as much. Realistically, how much of a boost is that to this running game?
I think it's a huge boost, not only just because he was the best running back through 6 weeks, the most efficient, most productive running back through 6 weeks. But we saw, even Marcus Major, who ended up having a decent day on Saturday, he's not fully healthy. He's got a shoulder issue and hasn't run particularly efficiently this season. And I think with Gavin Sawchuk, we saw the explosiveness on Saturday, but I do think it would help to have Tawi Walker back in the fold, and you can, then use Gavin Sawchuk as as kind of a counter to what Tawi Walker brings. So I think it's not only because of Tawi's production on the field, but also, the depth that he brings to that position. I do think it would make a big difference, but I also think the offensive line, does McCade Matauer come back this weekend? Have they fully settled on Caden Green as the starting left guard? It seems like they have. But what happens on the right side of the offensive line? So either way, this Kansas defense isn't very good against the run. They're 94th in rushing defense. They're certainly susceptible on the ground. But UCF was 123rd in rushing defense coming into the game, and OU still struggled. So they're going to have to run better this weekend. I think Tawi Walker's addition will help with that in some regard.
Last thing, Jesse, if this is a close football game Saturday, or heaven forbid, an upset victory for the Jayhawks, why is that going to be?
I think two things. I think one, it's going to be if OU can't get the running game going. I think that's one. Or if it's just not particularly efficient. We saw the effects on Saturday when OU's not running the ball. Then there's not much passing, going vertically down the field either. I mean, OU only had 4 passing plays of 15 yards or more. That not being able to run the ball has an effect on everything. So I think not running the ball, and again, I think what we talked about earlier, if this defense can't force turnovers, if OU loses the turnover battle, particularly if both those things happen like they did against UCF, that's not a great recipe for a Kansas team that is better than UCF and will be playing at home. So if you told me right now OU lost, I would say one or probably both of those things happened.
Hey, we got you covered all week on OUinsider.com and right here on this YouTube channel. The Oklahoma Drill podcast, the OU Insider live stream coming Wednesday night, the Under the Visor pregame podcast, as well as loads and loads of written content, not just previewing this game, but bringing you up to speed on what the Sooners are doing on the recruiting trail as well. So hit subscribe if you haven't already. Subscribe to this channel and go subscribe over at OUinsider.com. You're not going to get better bang for your buck anywhere on the internet. I can promise you that. Until next time, for Jesse Crittenden, I'm Parker Thune. Take it easy, everybody.